Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. I'm your host, Antrese, and if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. And if you are new here, I am so glad that you have found me. Savvy Painter is the podcast for artists who want practical, tactical tips to create a meaningful art practice that is both fulfilling and supports you.
Hey, friends. I wanted to share a story with you. And I got to say, this is kind of a running joke inside Growth Studio that it's not a real call unless I say something about my dogs. And this is kind of a story about my dogs, but it relates to you and your art and what this podcast is about. Some of you may know that I have two dogs, German Shepherds, who I adore with all of my heart. The male dog, Samwise Gamgee, if you must know his full name because he is always hungry and he follows me everywhere. Bless his little heart. Sam is a pretty reactive dog, so he requires a lot of training. And through training Sam, I have learned a lot about thresholds and how to grow those thresholds. So when we're uncomfortable and when we are reacting, Sam has been my master teacher. So with Sam, I get to see it sort of in the extreme state of being this like cute little happy, beautiful little puppy who prances around like a little prince. And he's so goofy. And then he perks his ears up, sniffs something, smells something, or sees something, and he just completely turns into Cujo. He's like a 90-pound raging dog. And because I've had Sam a while now, I've learned a lot about all the different signs that lead up to that. So at first, it really felt like to me, this dog is totally fine. And then all of a sudden he just snaps, no warning, and he's suddenly Cujo. Now I know all of the little itty bitty moments in between and all of the times when I catch it and I bring him back into his comfort zone. And I think Sam's a really good example because it's just so obvious when he goes over his point of, here I am, I'm super comfortable, I'm in my little home, everything's great. And when he's doing something or I lead him into a situation where he's uncertain or he's nervous, but he's still okay, there's these little signs that he gives. It's all in his body language. It's in the way that he looks at me or doesn't look at me, how stiff his body is. There's 1,000 little signs that tell me he is coming up to the point where he's no longer able to contain himself and we need to pull back. So there's that point where he is just simply not okay. And so we need to back up, back it down and get him into a place where he's comfortable again. Lucky for me, his two comfort zones are in the house and in the car. So I'm so grateful for that. But through months and months and months, years actually, of repetition of training Sam and learning about how he responds to different situations, what I'm about to share with you in this podcast episode has become so crystal clear to me and so obvious. So, of course, I turned it into something that I use inside of Growth Studio. Once I saw this, I could not unsee it. I'm pretty sure you've heard a lot of talk about your comfort zone. And, sometimes you just got to push through your comfort zone and all these different things that we say about it. Get outside of your comfort zone. And I know that I've mentioned this here on the podcast, but thanks to Sam, I think about this so differently than I had learned about it. And I think so differently than a lot of people talk about it and a lot of people experience it. I've been thinking a lot lately about the way that artists treat difficulty, and specifically about how many of us have been taught, either directly or indirectly, that when something's hard or when something's scary, it automatically means push harder. That if you're struggling, the answer is more effort. more discipline, more showing up, which it can be, but I also want to offer a different idea today. For me personally, this has changed so much about how I grow and how I treat risk and how I treat myself while I'm doing that. Because in my experience, the artists who grow the most consistently aren't the ones who push the hardest. They're the ones who understand that this is a cycle, that you push and you recover, that you stretch and you come back. And you do that over and over and over again across days, weeks, months, and years. And you significantly grow in a way that I think is really healthy and kind to yourself. So by the end of this episode, you are going to have a tool, a very simple, practical tool for knowing exactly where you are in your practice at any given moment. And you can learn from that what to do from there. So this is what I call the 3 zones. And if you've heard me talk about it before, stay with me because today I want to go somewhere different with it. I want to talk about what each zone actually feels like from the inside, because knowing what it feels like from the inside is what matters most, I think, because then you don't even need a label for it. You start to really listen to your intuition and to your inside voice, which is, so helpful when we're painting. So we have these 3 zones. You can think about it as 3 concentric rings, and in the middle is your comfort zone. And then outside of that is your growth threshold. And then we have what I affectionately call the ring of terror. So let's start with your comfort zone. From the inside, your comfort zone feels like ease. It feels like I know what I'm doing. I don't feel any of that sort of like anxiety or discomfort that comes from being a little bit unsure. This is a place where I just feel very much at ease. I feel relaxed. My body's relaxed. I'm not holding any tension because of what I'm currently doing. So for some of us, it might look like the brush that I use is very familiar, or these colors, I've consistently used them so much so they feel very familiar. I know how they're going to react. I know what it's going to be like. It's almost like you could do it in your sleep. And so for some people, they talk about it as this is where I wouldn't really call it autopilot. Some people talk about it derogatorily as being formulaic or repetitive. But in general, it's the type of work that you just feel really comfortable with. And a lot of artists, I think, feel guilty when they're in this space. Like it being easy means that you've stopped growing, or it being easy means you're not doing anything worthy, or if it's not hard, it doesn't count. And I want to push back on that a little bit because your circle of comfort is a sanctuary. It's where you rebuild confidence after you've had a stretch. It's where you come back to yourself after you have done something that was scary for you, or that was risky for you, or that you were uncertain about. And I constantly see this. The artists who grow the most consistently aren't the ones who never rest here. They're the ones who know how to use this place, your comfort zone, and how to let it restore them so that they can stretch again. And it's how you create trust. And that is one of the most important things I think you need in order to create work that is meaningful and is truly authentic to who you are. So Sam, for example, he loves being in the car. Like the car, it is definitely his comfort zone. And this morning, I took him to a very specific place in the park because he can see other people, he can see other dogs, but it's not a place where they will naturally come to. And so I know when I take him out of the car, he's excited to be there. So there's that level of excitement when you're doing something new or when you're doing something that's kind of scary that you want to do. So for artists, that might be trying a new material, it might be trying a new subject matter, it might be connecting with a gallery. Like there's so many things that we do that's like there's a part of us that's really excited about it, but then there's this other part that's like, "Ooh, this is kind of scary." And so Sam will bolt out of the car and then he immediately just puts his nose down and he starts sniffing, which is great. I want him to do that. You're also getting dog lessons here, I guess, by the way. But he's super psyched. He's super excited. He's super excited about being out there, but he's also scared. And I can see that by the way he holds himself. I can see that by the way he looks at me or doesn't look at me and how he looks around at his environment. He's high, high, high alert. So I allow him to be out there as long as he needs to be, but I keep the car door open. And what that does is it allows him to make a choice when he is kind of like, okay, I've had enough. And then I say, okay. And he races back to the car and leaps in, lays down, and just looks at me like, oh my God, I did it and I lived. And I give him tons of treats. Okay. So that is all you dog lovers out there. I know you're eating this up, and the rest of you are like, huh? But what he's showing me in that moment, what's actually happening is he's out there. I know what he looks like when he is reaching that circle of terror. And he also has the opportunity to decide for himself, I'm going back in. And that makes him trust me more and it allows him to explore this really scary thing that he's doing, knowing that he always has an out. Okay. And so that's really what we're doing with the circle of comfort and going back inside of it. If I kept him out there, if I said, come on, Sam, push through, be a big boy, like you're a tough German shepherd. You don't have to be scared of the little wiener dogs out there, whatever it is that he's seeing out there. And I pushed him to do that. The adrenaline, he would just get more and more and more amped up. And then he probably would start reacting. And so the goal is to get him to experience the scary thing, but not so much that he goes into the reign of terror, which is him reacting. And it's exactly the same way with us, right? So we try something new and we go out and we do the thing. And for artists, and we all have our own range, it's a continuum for all of us. So sometimes doing what arguably is a very small thing might put you into that zone of terror. And I want to really emphasize this because on the surface, I'm sure for some people, I'm taking Sam to the park and I'm letting him out of the car and we're walking around in little circles close enough to the car that he can always see it and always go back. You might argue that that's not a big deal, but for Sam, it kind of is because of all of the scary things that are happening around him, right? All of the unknowns, all of the people. So for some of you, that scary thing might be showing up to a gallery event or talking to people at a gallery event. That might be really scary and something that you want to ease into. For some of you, it might be painting without a plan, just going into the painting and painting with your gut and your intuition and going completely by instinct. And what I really want to emphasize here is the growth zone isn't about the enormity of what it is that you're doing or that it's a huge risk. It's how it feels for you inside of your body. From the inside, the growth zone feels like effort. It feels like you're not quite sure what you're doing. Like part of you really wants to go back to something safe, you know? So Sam, I think like sometimes really wants to just jump back in the car and get his treats for being outside and being a big boy. And so part of you is going to feel like this is kind of exciting and I'm scared and a little bit nervous, but I can handle it. I don't feel totally comfortable. It's definitely an uncomfortable feeling. But, you know, a lot of times that discomfort, it feels like excitement. It feels like you're stretching, like you're growing, like you're maybe a little bit queasy, but you're okay. When you're in the growth zone and you know you're in the growth zone, you can work with the discomfort instead of being derailed by it. You can realize that, hey, at any moment, I can decide to hop back into my comfort zone. I can go back to where it's safe. And knowing that, I think, changes everything. So I want to talk next about the Ring of Terror, what I affectionately call the Ring of Terror. So the Ring of Terror is when you have gone too far. From the inside, it feels like a complete shutdown, like your nervous system just said, nope. Not going to happen. And for a lot of us, what that looks like is we just freeze. Really good example of that. If you are the type of person like I have been who has a lot of anxiety in certain social situations. So, an art show, for example, when somebody comes up and wants to talk to you about your art, and you can feel your heartbeat just starts going up, and you just feel like that sense of like almost terror. But what actually happens is you start stumbling over your words. You can't form a sentence. You're like, somebody asks you what on the surface or on reflection later on, you're like, that was the easiest question. And I could not answer it. So what's happening there, you've passed over and you go into the freeze response. And so literally what has happened is your brain is sort of disconnected from your prefrontal cortex, and you no longer have the skill, let's say, of forming sentences. And you just have this experience of random words coming into your brain, but none of them quite fitting together. At least that's what it was for me. And so you just kind of freeze, literally freeze, and your brain is just completely blank. But it also sometimes looks like you're sitting there in your studio, you're staring at this painting, and you just can't paint it. You're just completely frozen. Or you might go into the flight response, which basically looks like you leave the studio, or you start, you distract yourself with other things, you procrastinate. Those can be, not always, but they can be sort of like low level flight response or low level freeze response, when we just sit there and we're just staring blankly at our painting, not to be confused with assessing it. It's like you're just staring at it and nothing is coming to you. Oftentimes, that's what it is. That's what's going on. And it's a really tough place to be in because your brain is completely short circuited and you can't make decisions. You can't think clearly. You can't be creative. So this is clearly very different from the discomfort that you feel when you are in the growth zone. Because when you're in the growth zone, you might be nervous, but you still have your faculties about you. You haven't gone over into the flight, freeze response. So you're still able to think about things. You're still able to consider things. You might be nervous about it, but all of your brain waves are online. So again, knowing this is so important because you can start to realize it and see it in real time as it's happening and allow yourself to take a step back, to go back into your comfort zone, which is exactly what you need to do in that moment. A lot of this talk about being in the comfort zone means that you're being lazy or that you're not trying hard enough or all this nonsense. I think it's like the idea is that when you get to that state where you might have shut down, the concept is we'll just push through. And it doesn't work. I've never seen it work in a way that is really kind to ourselves. Because here's what I think is actually true about growth. And this is something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. You cannot keep pushing out into risk and pushing. You can't continually do that indefinitely. You can't push without coming back to the circle of comfort to rest and to recharge. You don't get sustainable growth that way. You get burnout is what you get. You get the kind of stuckness that takes months and months to climb out of. Because here's another thing about it. Going out into the growth zone, doing something that feels risky, that feels uncomfortable, where you are doing the thing that is courageous for you, it takes an enormous amount of energy because it's not something that you just kind of like naturally, easily do. You're kind of going against what your body and brain wants to do, which is to conserve energy and take the easiest way out, right? That's how we conserve energy a lot of times. It's what our brain is designed to do. It wants to seek comfort, avoid pain, and conserve energy. And so when we go out into the growth zone, what we're asking it to do is not avoid pain and use a significant amount of energy. I'm pointing that out because so often when you do something risky, a lot of people naturally are exhausted afterwards. So just think about if you've ever had a show and you've spent all this time working so hard to get up to that show, and you've done all the paintings, you've done all these things, you're consistently putting yourself into that place of discomfort, and then you have the show, and then afterwards you're exhausted. Well, of course you're exhausted because you just did something that required an enormous amount of energy. And what a lot of people mistakenly think they need to do next is jump right back in and go full on in production. And what I would like to propose to you is that's exactly the moment when you need to plan for a rest. After you've done something that puts you in that place, you really need to recharge your batteries. Rest is the mechanism that makes growth possible. Rest is the thing that allows you to take those risks and be courageous in the first place. This is how it actually works. And somehow we've been sold this idea that rest is being lazy or that it's not productive, which of course it's not. You're resting. Knowing that, that's how and why self-trust builds risk tolerance and vice versa. That's what it looks like and means in practice. When you recognize that you need to rest and you allow yourself to rest instead of pushing, you're teaching yourself that you can be trusted, that when you need something, that need will be taken seriously. And when you know that you have your own back like that, you become willing to take bigger risks because the risk feels different when you trust yourself to catch yourself at the end of it, when you trust yourself to listen to what your needs are and to then take care of them. So I want to tell you about an artist named Andrew. Andrew's in Growth Studio. I think he's probably been in Growth Studio the longest. He definitely holds the record. So 3 years ago, walking into a gallery was what he called, and I love this phrase, a tower of terror, like full on ring of terror. Nervous system shut down. He couldn't walk into a gallery comfortably. And galleries, as I'm sure you're aware, are kind of important if you're a painter. And so on a recent Growth Studio call, he told me something that I was just so excited to hear. He said, now galleries are my comfort zone. Think about that for a second. The Tower of Terror became his circle of comfort. And it wasn't because he white knuckled his way through it 100 times. He worked through the zones. He stretched a little and then he came back and then he stretched a little bit further and then he came back and he did that over and over and over again. And over 3 years of very gently easing himself into it and then very strategically repeating the process until what was once that ring of terror, the Tower of Terror, is now a place that he feels at home, he feels comfortable in. And here's what I love about where he is now. His growth zone moved. So now he's working on talking to people at gallery openings, like having actual conversations and meeting people, talking to collectors, talking to other artists, talking to the gallery owners. That's his current stretch. 3 years ago, being in the same building as a gallery owner was his ring of terror, and now it's the growth zone, and he's in it with absolute confidence. He knows he can do it. So the zones aren't fixed. They move with you. Every time you work the stretch and the recover cycle, every time you kind of go out and come back in and go out and come back in, you expand what's possible for you and you expand your capacity. And so your territories keep growing. So here's a different kind of story, shorter, but I think it's really illustrative, is an artist named Mary signed up back in September to have a critique group come into her studio in March. And when she signed up, it felt super exciting, scary, but exciting. And it was like that kind of mix of, yeah, and also, oh my God, what am I doing? That's the growth zone feeling. But as we got closer and closer to March, she noticed that she could feel the zones shifting as the date approached. She knew where her comfort zone was, and she could feel, like in her words, it's starting to creep in a little bit, meaning the ring of terror was moving closer. It was starting to feel more and more intense. And this is the important part, is that she recognized that. This is what I want you to kind of like put a pin in, catch this. She realized what she was experiencing. She didn't experience a vague anxiety and wonder what was wrong with her. She had this language and she knew she was moving from the growth zone towards that place of terror. And she could use that information to make real choices. She could keep moving forward and work with the discomfort, or take a smaller step, do something a little bit less scary, pull back into her comfort zone and recharge first, maybe, right? So this is just another example of something we've talked about in other podcasts. Like everything just kind of layers on top of each other. But that's that kind of GPS idea again, that you have to know where you are in order to get where you want to go. So you have to locate yourself first and orient yourself, then you can navigate. So just that moment where Mary was able to say, hey, I can feel the ring of terror starting to creep in a little bit. That was the noticing, and that was her locating herself inside of these zones. That was that pause, that awareness. That was having her own back in real time, because she recognized it and gave herself the opportunity to have a choice about what she wanted to do next and how she handled it. So what I just described, Mary being aware of what zone she was in real time, and Andrew tracking that kind of stretch and recover cycle across the years, that kind of awareness doesn't usually happen in isolation. It happens in community. It happens when you have people around you doing the same work, using the same language, celebrating the same kind of wins. And that is exactly what Growth Studio is built for. I know the podcast gives you this map and it allows you to understand the language. What happens inside Growth Studio is the actual work, the live coaching calls, the repetition, the being with a group, a community where you're naming your zones out loud and having people reflect it back to you. And it's the place where Andrew's moment and Mary's moment happened in real time, not just in a single episode. So if you've been curious about Growth Studio, I'm going to drop the links in the podcast and invite you to join us. It is a lot of fun and it is incredibly impactful. If you're not quite ready for Growth Studio yet, I want to offer you a practice after this episode, just for the next week, just for one day in your studio. Just try to name which zone you're in. Just try to recognize, like, oh, am I in my comfort zone? Am I in the growth zone, or am I in a place where I need to take care of myself? And it's not about judging yourself or fixing anything. It's just naming it, right? Like, I'm in my comfort zone right now. I'm recharging. This is my happy place. That's what I call my comfort zone. Or I'm in my growth zone. I'm doing something that feels really uncomfortable, or it's a little bit uncomfortable, but this discomfort is tolerable for me. And I'm doing it on purpose, intentionally, and I'm doing it to grow. Or I have gone a little bit too far. I'm in that zone of terror and it's time for me to come back and take care of myself. That is the whole practice. And you'll find that naming where you are changes things way more than you would expect, because again, the noticing, the awareness, that's the first step that is so, so powerful. Also, one last thing, the zones I want you to know are not a hierarchy. Comfort isn't below growth. Rest isn't less than growing or stretching. It's a cycle. And when you know which part of the cycle that you're in, you're going to be able to work with it instead of against it. And that is what having your own back looks like in the most practical studio level sense of that phrase. All right, my friends. Andrew went from the Tower of Terror to comfort zone. Mary named her Ring of Terror before it arrived, and she gave herself a real opportunity to make decisions. That is available to you. You're not going to do it perfectly, but keep showing up and you'll start to notice, and the noticing starts to compound, and that is the whole thing. Okay. That's what I have for you this week. I will talk to you soon. And until then, have a beautiful week in your studio, and I'll see you next week.